The conflict in the Middle East continues. There is an exchange of strikes. Israel is striking Iran. Iran, in turn, is striking Israel. Accordingly, the United States plans to provide Israel with more than $3 billion in aid to purchase modern air defense systems and to help with its defense. In turn, this means that Ukraine may not expect the arrival, as well as the possible increase in the transfer of air defense systems in the foreseeable future. There are quite serious risks that the priority will now be set in a different direction, although Iran hasn't launched that many, but well, yes, it's symptomatic. 100 missiles, over 100 missiles in a single strike and so on. Ballistic ones, of course, that's a lot, but these aren't as modern as the missiles Russia launches. So, what can we conclude for ourselves? That the concerns that were expressed are indeed coming true. That is, the US will now be allocating more aid to Israel. Well, such trends are really unfortunately being observed. The issue of aid to Ukraine remains up in the air. We are not hearing about additional aid packages, and at the same time there are statements suggesting that possibly by 2026 they even plan to reduce these aid packages from the United States. It's a difficult situation. The commander-in-chief, the president of Ukraine, is doing everything possible, and there will be the G7. President Zelensky will be in Canada, and I have no doubt that the Ukrainian team, led by the president, will take advantage of every opportunity to change the situation for us and secure as much aid and support for Ukraine as possible, because this is important. After that, there will also be a NATO summit in the Netherlands, and I also think there will be an active effort to secure support for Ukraine, and indeed the Ukrainian authorities will do a lot to draw attention and to ensure that aid continues to come in. First and foremost, from European countries that are in no hurry to send anything to Israel because they do not support the position of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the Israeli authorities regarding Gaza. So there is already this kind of consequence which is negative for us. There are positive ones as well, I've mentioned them about the production of Shaheds and ballistic missiles, but it's important to understand that Russia has also been looking for ways to hedge its bets, and it's no coincidence that the drone production is now being localized in North Korea, and DPRK has been exploring the possibility of actually manufacturing drones, including for Russia, on its own territory. Although I think this by no means rules out the possibility that drones might someday reach North Korea as well, or that there could be their own web operation there. Why not? Anything is possible, and the security service of Ukraine has set a very good example. So Russia will obviously be relocating drone production to North Korea. Alabuga is already accessible to our drones. They are successfully striking and destroying production lines. There is already information that as a result of this week's strikes, a production line directly involved in manufacturing Shaheds was put out of commission, as well as a warehouse containing elements, components, and parts used to produce these kamikaze drones. Therefore, it will indeed be quite difficult and challenging for the enemy to continue doing this on Russian territory. They will relocate this to North Korea, and yes, Iran will not be able to supply weapons to Russia for a certain period of time. This is already obvious. Will Russia compensate for this with its own production and with North Korea? I think so. They should forget about Iran for a while. But everything depends on how long the war will last. Here, representatives of the Iranian authorities, for example, the country's foreign minister Araghchi, are already saying, among other things, that Iran is supposedly ready to resume negotiations about giving up nuclear weapons. But Tehran officially does not intend to give up the so-called peaceful atom. They have made this clear. What they are really talking about is being ready to discuss stopping their uranium enrichment program. Yes, that is indeed what is being discussed. And why did this happen? Well, obviously, it's also because Israel's intensive bombings are ongoing. They are now striking not only nuclear industry facilities or nuclear physicists and educational institutions where these physicists are located, but also targeting oil and gas industry facilities. And as for the oil and gas industry, this is a major drawback for us, because by destroying gas facilities and the capacity for processing and extraction, why is this such a big drawback for us? Israel is destroying Iran's ability to sell oil and gas, primarily to China, because the largest market for Iranian oil and gas is China. And by destroying these opportunities, which will be difficult to restore in the short term, after all, time, resources and capabilities are needed, and Iran will not be able to recover very quickly. This is already obvious. So, in fact, for us, this is a disadvantage because, firstly, if Iran is now unable to supply, and in addition, Iran has announced that it has closed the Strait of Hormuz, they have closed the entrance to the Persian Gulf. So, Iran will not be able to sell oil and gas. Who will do this instead? Obviously, Putin and Russia will try to take advantage of this. There is no doubt about it. The first customers will be China and India. Secondly, this will inevitably lead to an increase in oil prices. The price of oil will continue to rise. What does this mean? It means that Russia will gain an additional market for its products, plus it will gain opportunities to sell and make profits. Unless a decision is made in Canada these days during the G7 meetings, where Ukraine will also be present, to set a price cap on Russian oil at $45 per barrel, it is clear that Russia will have additional sources of income and profits, which will, as a direct consequence, make it possible for Russia to, in this way, finance its war machine, its military-industrial complex, and thus result its full-scale aggression against Ukraine, which is of course not very favorable for us. And so the solution is still, you see, for Ukraine, the most favorable scenario has always been for Iran to reach an agreement with the West, for sanctions against Iran to be lifted, for investments to flow into Iran, and for Iran to finally be separated from Russia. That would have been possible. French, German, American companies from many European countries, even Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, even the United Arab Emirates, they were ready. Qatar as well, and they were just waiting for the moment when it would be officially possible to invest in manufacturing and sell to Iran. Airbus, which is French, was also considering the possibilities. They are constantly lining up and competing with the American company Boeing over who will sell new planes to Iran once the sanctions on air travel and other sectors are lifted. And it's the same in many other sectors when it comes to trading, investing, and making profit and gains. Ultimately, this would pull Iran away from Russia and China. There have already been such historical parallels. Iran was not always like this. Before the 1979 revolution, there were many positive changes in Iran, and Tehran maintained very strong ties of cooperation and interaction with the West, and it could be the same way now. We should be interested in a scenario where the confrontation stops, so that the exchange of strikes ceases and Iran resumes negotiations on an agreement with the United States of America and the West, accepting the mediation of Germany and France. Why? Because now US President Trump is starting to claim that the Russian dictator Putin is ready to take on a mediating role and is actually prepared to conduct negotiations between Iran and Israel. Well, that's bad, of course. Earlier, France and Germany had announced that they were ready to act as mediators. And France has quite long-standing and stable ties with Iran through its diplomacy. They have the capacity to actually conduct these negotiations effectively. Of course, in the context of Ukraine, when we talk about our interests, it is much better for us if France and Germany act as mediators, leaving Putin no chance to step onto the international stage and boast that nothing in the Middle East can be resolved without him. Russia must lose in the Middle East and ultimately withdraw from there. It must suffer a fiasco, just as the Soviet Union and its policies and approaches to resolving issues in this region once did. That is why we should be fully interested in and welcome the continuation of negotiations and the cessation of hostilities. This is in our interest. It is actually in our interest, paradoxical as it may sound, but I'll say it for Iran, which may possibly change its regime, change its government, but which would become more successful in terms of its oil and gas industry and selling these resources to the West, which as a result should lead to a drop in oil prices. Iran should be a competitor to Russia. They should not be partners. They need to be serious competitors. This will make Putin hate Iran. That's all there is to it. And accordingly, not allow Iran opportunities to profit. This will trigger a chain reaction, and the alliance between them will be destroyed. I hope we will get to that point. Otherwise, the consequences for us could be more negative. But there is a chance for a positive breakthrough, that Iran will eventually resume negotiations, and in the end the West will come in Western corporations, companies, investments, and trading opportunities will enter, and ultimately break up the Iran-Russia alliance. Such chances do exist.